we'll do is actually remove that, and what it does is equalizes pressure across the hatch. So once that thing is plugged in, you know that everything is super tight and that you shouldn't have any leaks on orbit.
One of the other things that I think is pretty cool about Dragon, you can kind of see them on the edges there are some of the windows. And I know that Dragon started out as cargo. It was Cargo Dragon. You have your cargo version, and before you moved on to the Crew Dragon version, but you even had windows on the cargo version. Can you explain kind of why that was?
Yeah, the very first Cargo Dragon that we ever launched had a window over the hatch, over the side hatch, and the reason we did that is we've always envisioned Dragon to ultimately be a crewed vehicle. So even in the beginning, for the very first vehicle we ever made, which didn't even really carry much cargo, we put that window there, and it to us symbolizes what Dragon's purpose has been all along. You know, taking those steps, starting off with the CRS program, and resupplying the space station with experiments and
on the touchscreen technology. We saw a little bit about that. Obviously, this is a very different kind of look than what we saw during the space shuttle.
You know, it's the future. I mean, we had our LCD displays, and we had lots of buttons to press, and valves and switches. And I think this new technology will allow us to get through procedures much more much faster, because we had paper flight. Wires and things hanging off, and their knee boards. You can see their knee boards on their left knees, and so that's for some extra little notes and things.
The hatch is closed now.
There's some commentary.
We are ready for the post-ingress briefing when you are
and
ready.
And we just heard confirmation on the loops that the hatch is closed. So that is a little bit ahead of schedule. Confirmation on the loops that the hatch is closed. So that is a little bit ahead of schedule.
We are motivated to go today.
We're ready. Go ahead.
We are motivated to go today.
Okay, on the weather, we still have some rain showers moving through the area. Okay, on the weather, we do have we still have some rain showers moving through the area. To the count, but we do have a reasonable. We are going to take a look at the pad and ascent track weather at T-minus 1 hour at 30 minutes. Pad and ascent track weather at T-minus 1 hour at 30 minutes. And the next decision point will be prior to prop load.
Okay, we copy.
And on the vehicle health front, both
F9
and Dragon health remains nominal. And on the vehicle health front, both F9 and Dragon health remains nominal with no items.
So we just heard the weather is still iffy.
Good news.
So
Thank
we just
you.
heard the weather is still iffy.
Good news. Thank you.
Post-ingress brief.
The weather is still iffy.
Report when ready for contracts with Falcon 9 operators. Report when ready for contracts with Falcon 9 operators.
We are ready for the F9 operator. We are ready for the F9 operator.
Copy. Expect that shortly. Copy. Expect that shortly.
So when we hear that chatter pick back up, we're going to quiet right down so that you can listen into that along with us. But we just heard them discussing the weather briefly, still keeping an eye on that. But the next decision point is going to be still keeping an eye on that. But the next decision point is going to be now and then before reevaluate on before they start fueling the rocket. For now, but in the meantime, reevaluate Falcon 9 before they start fueling the rocket. So, but in the meantime, it sounds like Falcon 9 and it sounds like kind of a little bit of a repeat from vehicles Wednesday that we're just keeping an eye on the weather. Kind of a little bit of a repeat from Wednesday that we're just keeping an eye on the weather at this point.
Well, you can see on their left legs, well, in that previous image.
Dragon SpaceX comm checks with F9. You can expect it in about 1 to 2 minutes.
Dragon's ready.
All right, on their left legs there, they have these satchels that are strapped to their legs. Inside are some crew provisions, including these tablets that you see that they have displayed there.
You say, Lauren, those are tablets versus just kneeboards that you can write on?
Or the tablets are inside.
Oh, they're inside.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so when would they pull those tablets out to use them?
During the mission,
Okay.
while on orbit.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's coming, if the background noise is coming through over the air, but we hear the rain really picking up outside the studio here. So I'm kind of wondering if Bob and Doug are hearing the sounds of the rain clouds opening up over the pad. It looks like it's still kind of patchy out there. But again, we were following some thunderstorms that look like they may be making their way over here. It kind of looks like it's raining from that view. It's a little bit hard to tell through the haze.
All right, launch is now just over 2 hours away. Tahira, you are there with the social teams. Now that the hatch is closed and the rain's picking up and all kinds of exciting things are going on right now as we count down and get into the last 2 hours of the count, I bet things are getting pretty interesting on social media.
Hey, Lauren. I mean, yes, they are. So many different things are going on right now, and I think people online are just wondering what's going to happen with today's mission. I have TweetDeck open right now, and it is just scrolling with the conversation of people around the nation talking about today's launch attempt. We also just checked viewership, and we are now up to 1.4 million people watching this live broadcast, so really hope things look good with weather. And on that note, let's take a look at some of the things being said on Twitter right now. So it looks like, we just have some more future astronauts. I really love seeing the young generation just getting mobilized, getting excited about today's mission. Looks like we've also got some Godspeed and safe travels for both astronauts today. Really do wish them the best of luck on the second attempt. Hope it happens. Some throwback photos, all from people visiting NASA's centers, and also just let's do this. I love this can-do attitude, and I just love seeing that people are still keeping the energy alive for today's launch. So there were obviously some disappointing reactions to Wednesday's scrub, but let's take a look at how people are getting excited for today's attempt. Let's roll.
Ready for takeoff.
Ready to launch America.
3, 2, 1, go!
Ready for liftoff?
And beyond! I hope you guys make it safe to the space station.
I mean, how fun is that video? I think I will definitely have to attempt the worm after this, but just really glad to see everyone in good spirits leading into today's second launch attempt, and I really hope everybody will have something to smile about. And with that, let's head back to Lauren. Lauren.
Thanks, Tahira. So it looks like people are pretty stoked about today's attempt. Please continue to join the conversation by using the hashtag LaunchAmerica across all the social media channels.
Yeah, I really love seeing the little kids get excited. I know my 3-year-old is super excited. She's got an astronaut sleeping bag and
Really?
she loves to climb in it. Yeah, it's the body of the bag is a spacesuit, and then the head is empty where the pillow is. So when she gets inside, it looks like she's got a spacesuit on. So she loves it.
That's the inspiration for that next generation of explorers going to take Doug and Bob's place one day. And I think we have some people out there that are so interested in our conversation about the worm and the meatball that they've created something called the worm ball.
What?
Yeah, I was checking my email during that because I emailed you guys the worm ball, and I was like, what is this? I'm having a hard time seeing it, but what is the worm ball?
So it's a NASA meatball, which is, what it should be.
Yes.
Okay, look at it. There it is.
All right, thank you. I need a visual.
So they took the angular NASA logo and put in the worm inside of the meatball. Can you live with that, Lauren?
You know what? That's a beautiful compromise. I'll take it. I'll take it.
It's a nice marriage of the two.
Oh, I love you, man.
Truth. And there is another live look at Launch Complex 39A, and we have had the opportunity to share with you a lot about the SpaceX Crew Dragon sitting on top of Falcon 9, a lot about the crew themselves, and the significance of today as the official return, we hope, of human launch capability to American shores. But we would be remiss if we did not explain why this pad 39A is hallowed ground.
We're go. Same tide. We're go. Altitude, velocity, light.
Many of NASA's storied missions began their daring journey from the exact same spot on Earth. Launch Complex 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. This massive structure of steel and concrete has cradled rockets and guided each on their fiery ascent to space for over 50 years. There can be no launch without a launch pad, and this hallowed ground has a history greater than any other. Having evolved and been reshaped for each new era of space flight, it's alive with a heartbeat as strong as the first. Launchpad 39A came to life under the direction of project engineer Harry May as NASA ramped up its efforts to achieve an unprecedented calling.
Why, some say the moon. Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain?
In 1962, Earth-moving machines sculpted its massive pyramid base to a height of 40 feet. Then, concrete was poured to hold it in place. To launch the world's first moon rocket, engineers cut a flame trench nearly the length of 2 football fields down the middle of the mound. It was then lined with heat-resistant bricks to deflect 7.5 million pounds of earth-rattling thrust, first felt on Apollo 8. Less than a year later, Apollo 11 launched from Pad 39A. And hundreds of millions of people around the world watched as it landed on the moon 3 days later. Nearly a decade after this Apollo era, 39A again took center stage with a new, one-of-a-kind spacecraft, the Space Shuttle. Millions of pounds of additional steel for service structures transformed the look, but not the purpose: human spaceflight. In all, 82 space shuttles blasted off from 39A until the very last.
Start. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All 3 engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. The final liftoff of Atlantis on the shoulders of the space shuttle. America will continue the dream.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
With the fleet retired, demolition crews removed the shuttle-era hardware to clear the way for NASA's monumental decision to lease this historic launch site to the private company SpaceX. Today, its sleek and modern design supports a family of rockets that has advanced the commercial age of American spaceflight. Now, 50 years after it first sent humans to the moon, this historic spaceport stands ready for the next wave of human exploration.
And we're looking live again at Pad 39A. We're looking at the pad closeout team. You can identify them by their numbers there. And we heard confirmation of the hatch being closed just a few minutes ago. So again, things a little bit ahead of schedule. And when I say ahead of schedule, I don't mean the launch time is changing. I just mean some of the specific milestones in the timeline. Those times are a little bit flexible, but that launch window remains instantaneous at 3:22 this afternoon. And Leland, you know, we just saw a piece about the history of Pad 39A.
All stations, Chief Engineer, on countdown 1 for comm check with the crew.
We're going to pause for that comm check.
Falcon 9, guidance, navigation, and control.
Dragon GNC on countdown 1, comm check.
GNC Dragon, we have you loud and clear.
GNC loud and clear. Stand by for comm check by the propulsion engineer.
Dragon, prop on countdown 1, comm check.
Prop, Dragon, loud and clear.
Prop, loud and clear. Stand by for comm check with the avionics engineer.
Dragon, avionics on countdown 1, comm check.
Avionics Dragon, loud and clear.
Avionics loud and clear. Stand by for comm check by ground segment engineer.
Dragon, ground segment on countdown 1, comm check.
Ground segment Dragon, loud and clear.
Ground segment loud and clear. Stand by for comm check by launch control.
Dragon, launch control on countdown 1, comm check.
Launch control Dragon, loud and clear.
Launch control, loud and clear. Stand by for comm check by the chief engineer. Dragon, chief engineer on countdown 1, comm check.
Chief engineer Dragon, we've got you loud and clear, Bala.
Chief engineer, loud and clear. This completes the Falcon 9 responsible engineer comm check.
And we just saw a thumbs up from Doug Hurley. We listened to a series of comms checks there, and so everything.
Chief engineer on Dragon to ground.
Loud and clear on Dragon to ground.
Loud and clear. Well, good luck, and let's see if the rain clears up.
That sentiment is shared by all here.
Do it.
Copy that.
So Bob and Doug, along with the launch teams and all of the rest of America, hoping the rain clears up here. But as far as comms checks go, everything sounded pretty normal, pretty nominal there. So we're just waiting on the weather to clear up. But again, there's a live look at Launch Complex 39A, the site of 82 space shuttle missions where they began, and of course Apollo, the first mission to the moon, Apollo 11 lifted off from 39A. And Leland, you were just 5 years old when that happened. Take us back there.
Marie and Lauren, I was 5, and I was the antenna engineer during the broadcast. I was the kid standing behind the black and white Sylvania television holding the rabbit ears, and my dad said, move to the left, move to the right. And I was trying to look around the television to see what was going on, but they said, no, don't move, stay there. So I never actually saw the actual landing on the moon, Neil and Buzz walking on the moon. And the next day, all my friends in my community were like, yeah, you want to be an astronaut? We just had this momentous thing. I said, no. I didn't see it. I want to be Arthur Ashe, because Arthur Ashe trained 5 blocks down the street from where I grew up. And my dad talked about his excellence, his perseverance, his athleticism. And so it wasn't until I got to NASA, working as an engineer at NASA Langley, that a friend of mine said, you'd be a great astronaut. And I just laughed at him. And I didn't fill the application out, but another friend of mine got in, Charlie Camarda. And I said, if he can become an astronaut, I can become one. So I applied the next year, and I got in the 1998 class. And I think about this, again, storied legacy, Pad 39A. I was there in 2008 and 2009, Space Shuttle Atlantis, the last one that came in with Doug and the rest of the crew. And it's just an amazing time to see this new era with Lauren, with your SpaceX Crew Dragon about to take off.
I never heard that story.
I've got a million stories. A million stories.
Wow. And it's so cool that, you do have a lot of these kids that are watching today who have never seen a flight, a human space flight from KSC before. And this is their first time. And I'm trying to remember back, I grew up in the shuttle era, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and I remember sometimes when the shuttle would land at Edwards Air Force Base, you'd hear those sonic booms. You hear the double sonic booms in school, and we all just knew, oh, that's the space shuttle. It was just a thing. We just knew about that. And it did make me sad that there's an entire generation of kids who didn't grow up with that experience. And I'm just so proud that, today, hopefully, we get to provide that for kids and hopefully have more and more of these launches to the point where it becomes routine, hopefully never boring, but routine.
And there's talent in every zip code. So you have to make sure that every kid has the opportunity to do these types of things. If they believe in themselves, then we give them the right tools that they can use to be in STEM fields. And, we have a very diverse group of people up here working together to get Bob and Doug off safely. And I think more people that see this type of diversity will have a chance to say, I can do that too.
Yes. Absolutely. And, we have a lot of kids watching today, and we have an opportunity to hear from another really awesome role model, especially for the little girls in the audience. So we want to throw it over to Gary in Houston to talk to a very special astronaut standing by there. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Marie. I have the distinct pleasure of being joined by one of NASA's record-setting astronauts and a recent resident aboard the space station, Christina Cook. Christina, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you today.
Christina, we're coming up on 20 years of continuous human presence on the International Space Station, and you were one of those humans. What's it like to see a new milestone like this launch unfold after so much history already?
You're right. So much history indeed, and it's just been great to watch it all unfold. I think for me, the most exciting thing is how NASA is not only innovating in what we do, exploring the universe, pushing the boundaries, getting knowledge on the space station, bringing it back to Earth for benefits here, but in how we do it. We're innovating in the implementation of those goals and of our mission. And what that means is that bringing in the private sector, bringing in a commercial space economy for low Earth orbit, means space is going to be more accessible and more innovative. And it's just an awesome new era of history to be able to witness.
You hold the record for the longest single stay by a female astronaut in space. What's it like living aboard for so long?
Well, it is truly a privilege every single day. I have to say it's a beautiful thing to look down on the Earth and to be able to kind of contribute to a space program that you yourself have held in such high regard your entire life. I would say that the biggest challenge going into sort of those longer times is remaining vigilant. The engineers make it so easy to live on board the space station. Sometimes you forget you're actually surrounded by such a hostile environment. So remaining vigilant both day to day to have that appreciation that you wake up with every day, and then also being vigilant, knowing that things could take a turn for the worse at any time, and you have to be ready to react to that. So it's a great privilege, but it also comes with great responsibility.
You came to NASA after the days of the shuttle program, and you flew on the Russian Soyuz. What does it mean to have this private capability to fly astronauts to the station?
Well, I think it's just a great innovation in terms of our partnerships. When we started out, it was individual countries pursuing space exploration. We brought in the international aspect of it, and now we're really folding in that commercial aspect, bringing the innovation of all of our American industrial power and recognizing that the more partnerships we have, the more accessible, the more innovative space exploration can be. So it's an awesome time, and it brings with it so much more capability into the program as well. So it's not only how we're doing it, but it's what it brings.
We're looking forward to having this transportation from private companies. How does it help you do your job in space?
I think one concept that we have in NASA for safety and to mitigate risk is called dissimilar redundancy. And here now we're bringing up a whole second way of getting crew to the International Space Station and getting cargo, last-minute cargo. So we're increasing how much science we can do on board the space station by twofold. We're increasing how we can, our options for getting items up, stowage items, supplies, provisions, science experiments. So we're really just banking on the extra redundancy to make the program that much more robust.
We're watching Bob and Doug go through the final phases of preparing for this launch. What's going through your mind so close to liftoff?
Oh, it is such a great day indeed. You know, it's interesting because I think it's not so much what is going through your mind, but what's not going through your mind. You know, you're not thinking about all the things could go wrong. You're thinking about enabling success by doing what you've been trained to do. One of the sayings we have is that on launch day, astronauts are sometimes the most calm people in the room. And I found that to be true on my launch day, too. I think it's kind of this career culmination of everything you've learned, everything you've dreamed of, and you know that it's coming together in that day and that you're going to finally do what you're prepared to do, execute the mission, and it just really brings a sense of calm and readiness.
NASA astronaut Christina Cook, always an honor to hear from you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Well, once Bob and Doug arrive at the station, NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy will be ready to welcome them on board. So in anticipation of their launch, he had this message for them.
Hello, everyone. I'm astronaut Chris Cassidy, commander of Expedition 63 on board the International Space Station, flying 250 miles above the Earth. Like you, I'm excited about today's launch and the possibilities it will bring to America and to the world. But also, I'm very excited that two close friends will be arriving and joining the crew. I had the privilege of flying with Doug Hurley on both of our first shuttle missions back in 2009. Together, we came to the International Space Station and helped construct the amazing facility that it is today. Although this will be my first mission with Bob, it was my honor to follow him as the chief of the office when he left back in 2015 to begin training for this amazing mission. Personally, I've been very fortunate to fly in two different spacecraft. Launching from America on the shuttle, and most recently launching from Kazakhstan in the Soyuz. But I can't tell you how exciting it is to know that we're once again launching Americans from the coast of Florida. And finally, here's a story I'd like to share with you. Back in 1981, John Young and Bob Crippen launched on Space Shuttle Columbia, the very first space shuttle flight, marking the last time we flew Americans on a brand new vehicle.
434, Max Q-48. Roger.
With them, they flew an American flag, representing America's technical prowess.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
30 years later, that same flag was flown to the International Space Station. This flag remains here today, waiting for Bob and Doug. Our flag means so many things to our country, and this small piece of America represents what we'll be able to achieve together. We'll never stop exploring. And so Bob and Doug can take this very special flag home to Earth, where it awaits its next journey to the cosmos. In a few years, the First Orion crew will take this flag with it around the moon. All of this starts today. I'll be watching outside the window along with everyone else in America and around the world. I can't wait to look out the window and see my friends on close approach. Go Falcon 9, go Dragon, and go Bob and Doug. I'll see you soon.
And there again is a live look at Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where we are T-minus 1 hour, 41 minutes, 58 seconds and counting from liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket carrying Crew Dragon with astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley strapped inside. We can see some raindrops on the screen there. It looks like rain coming down at the pad, but we're still monitoring weather, and it sounds like there's going to be another decision point before they start fueling the Falcon 9 rocket, which is scheduled to happen at about T-minus 35 minutes. So we just heard a little bit about where they're headed. If the weather cooperates today, to the International Space Station. Leland, you've been there twice, and I know just from what you've told us, it's this Leviathan in space and the site of so much important work and partnerships happening.
Right. Chris Cassidy is up there floating in the Columbus laboratory that I installed, or our team of us installed on STS-122. And I think about, using this robotic arm that was made in Canada. The European Space Agency built the Columbus laboratory, and my job was to use that arm and attach it to the International Space Station. And as it was getting closer and closer, the motion just stopped. And I'm like, what is going on? And there are 4 ready-to-latch indicators that have a very slight spring force that I was moving so slowly with the hand controller, the translational hand controller, that spring force stalled out the motion. And Peggy Whitton was behind me, and she said, Leland, there's some commentary. weather update, I think.
Go ahead, sir.
Hey, Doug. We're still waiting for a weather update expected at 18 Zulu. Therefore, the next assessment will be closer to the propellant load time. We are currently no-go on launch weather, but we are showing an expected clear of 1830 Zulu.
Okay, copy all. Thanks for the update.
So we just heard if they were to launch right now, the weather would be no-go. However, it sounds like there may be an opportunity if the weather clears, as it sounds like they expect it may. So again, we're gonna keep listening as we continue talking. If we start to hear any kind of chatter, especially if it's about the weather, we're gonna do our best to quiet down so that we don't step on that and everyone can hear it along with us. But Leland, you were just talking about the work on station and Peggy Whitson was getting ready to tell you something.
Well, so the Columbus Laboratory is stalled out. It's about to be attached, and there are 10,000 people waiting. Their job security depended on me installing this thing properly.
Right.
And Peggy said, Leland, push just a little bit harder on the hand controller, and all 4 ready-to-latch indicators went green. And I was like, yes! And that was our primary mission objective. But that paled in comparison to what happened next. Peggy invited us over to dinner in the Russian segment, and we had this meal with people from all over the world, Russian, German, French, African American, Asian American. This diversity that we talked about earlier, were up there breaking bread at 17,500 miles per hour while listening to Sade's Smooth Operator. It blew my mind. It was Smooth Operator, right?
You know? What an appropriate song for this job, too, right?
Wow, does she know? She knows now.
Yeah. And Dan Tani actually changed the song from Smooth Operator to Arm Operator. So you see Arm Operator.
I love it. Love it. And Leland, you actually, we were in another taped segment when you got a text from Drew Feustel. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, Drew Feustel, his good friend, just sent me a text saying that the families say hello to all who are watching and thank the nation and the world for their support and interest. And Chris Ferguson just actually sent me a text. He was the commander on STS-135 and one of my classmates from the 1998 class, and he says, way to go, Godspeed on Crew Dragon.
That's awesome. It's great to hear those words of support. Thank you guys for watching and everybody following along at home. I mean, the COVID-19 situation has been just a tough time for people stuck inside, homeschooling their kids, still trying to do their jobs, and so it's really cool to be able to watch this happening. And we see the pad closeout team. It looks like they are getting ready, or they've left the white room and they've already come down the crew access arm, so they are getting ready to leave the pad now. And we are going to go now to the Operations and Support Building 2, where Daryl Nail is standing by with NASA's Chief of Staff to talk to us a little bit about some of NASA's ambitions beyond the International Space Station and its work with the Commercial Crew Program. Daryl?
Yeah, that's right. We're here in the mission briefing room at the top of Operations and Support Building here, where there's a lot of important people that are gathering to watch the launch here. And one of those people, it's not me, by the way, one of those people that is important is Gabe Sherman, NASA's Chief of Staff. We appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Daryl.
You got kind of the insight of what's coming down the pike here at NASA. So, of course, today is Commercial Crew, and we're focused on that, seeding the commercial market. But what's off in the horizon for NASA?
Well, I'll just tell you, it's an incredibly exciting time to be at NASA, and you know this. I mean, you're here every day. But whenever you think about what we're doing with Commercial Crew, in the horizon in July, we're launching Mars Perseverance, which is just going to be an incredible thing for us. You look at the end of this year, SLS, the largest rocket in the world, is going through testing right now, going through green run testing, and we're hoping maybe by the end of the year we can even get it right out here to the Cape, which would be just an incredible achievement for our team. So there is no shortage of things to be excited about at NASA right now.
And it feels like everything is really starting to happen here recently with everything that you just mentioned. And if we get that first Artemis launch, that could be right around the corner as well.
Oh man, we're looking at I think late 2021 is what we're looking for. And so you think about SLS potentially moving from the green run to the Cape. You've got Orion finishing up its last little bit of testing. It moved from Plumbrook earlier this year, our station up there in Ohio, down to KSC. So we're looking at checking it out throughout next year. and hopefully we'll have the first integrated flight of SLS and Orion at the end of 2021. And I'm telling you, that is going to be a moment.
That will be exciting.
Yeah.
And there will be a thunderous boom right here at the Kennedy Space Center. So with Mars as the end goal, how does all of this get to that end point?
You bet. No, and I think that's what's so important about the Artemis program, right? Our long-term vision is to get to Mars. But, when you think about Artemis, everything that we're doing at the moon is helping us learn, prove out capabilities and technologies, work through the right mission durations, understand how we utilize the resources of the moon potentially to go further onto Mars. So the technology, the science, the exploration, architecture that we're putting together, each and every piece of it is helping us learn a little bit more, prove out a little bit more so we can take that next giant leap to Mars. And so everything that we're doing at the moon helps prepare us to move on to Mars.
How about the activity in low Earth orbit, like Commercial Crew, which is happening today? How does that help us for missions to the moon?
Yeah, I think anytime you're launching humans, you're learning, right? And you're taking what you've learned and you're moving it forward to the next mission. But I think it's really about the business case. If you think about what Commercial Crew is, it's NASA moving from owning and operating hardware to buying a service, right? And if you remember, just a few weeks ago, and we awarded 3 contracts on the human landing system to commercial companies. And so we're hoping that we move to a day where we're actually buying a service to get our astronauts back and forth to the moon. So actually enabling the commercial market to go from low Earth orbit all the way out to lunar orbit. And so Commercial Crew is a great proving ground for that. Helps us prove out that business case, build those partnerships, and then we get a feed forward to the moon. So it means a lot. This means a lot as we move out.
And it's really exciting when you talk about the Commercial Crew, the commercial aspect going to the moon, right, and those partners. They're going to be studying those landers to see if they are viable for NASA?
Yeah, working through a tremendous process with the commercial providers and NASA engineers going through initial designs right now, looking at the capabilities that they've proposed, and then trying to make decisions on which landing system goes early in 2024, which landing systems are better prepared for sustainability out in the later 20s. And so that is going to be an ongoing process throughout this year and moving into next. So it's going to be really exciting to kind of see what comes out as, hey, this is the lander that's going to take the first woman and the next man to the moon in 2024.
Right, so different than the time of Apollo when we went to the moon, and that program ultimately came to an end. The idea here, though, is to try to create some sustainability. Talk about that.
Right, and sustainability, you can get to sustainability if you have reusability, right? And that's what we're seeing with Commercial Crew for sure. But whenever you think about our human landing system, you're looking at a system that we put out there at the moon once we get to sustainability, and it's going back and forth, taking multiple trips to the lunar surface, back up to Gateway, which you're familiar with, is kind of our smaller space station we're going to put in orbit around the moon. So we are building an architecture that is going to enable reusability at the moon. Apollo never had that. And so whenever you think about driving down cost and increasing access, reusability, sustainability are critical.
So you get to see everything from a very high level at NASA. What's it like for you personally, I'm curious, to be here at the Kennedy Space Center to watch a launch and to just see this amazing facility where all of this activity happens?
Yeah, I think sometimes people think since I work at NASA, I'm around this stuff all the time. I'm not, right? I don't get to come down here nearly as often as I'd like. So it's just as exciting for me as it is for anybody else in this room. When you think about all the hard work that our team has put in to get us to this day, to actually come down and be a part of it with them, it's just overwhelming and incredible. So we're just a little bit excited.
All right, Gabe Sherman, NASA's Chief of Staff. We appreciate you joining us today and enjoy the launch. I certainly know you will if we're able to get that one off. We're going to toss this back now to Hawthorne, California.
Joining us now is SpaceX's Lars Blackmore to discuss SpaceX's future ambitions to visit the moon and Mars. Thanks for joining us again today for a second round.
You're welcome.
Could you tell us just a little bit about your background and what you do here at SpaceX?
Yeah, well, I'm in charge of entry and landing for Starship, which is SpaceX's next rocket after Falcon 9. And before that, I worked for many years on the same thing for Falcon. So hopefully today you'll see another one of those landings on a drone ship.
Awesome. And speaking of that, what role does reusability play in getting people to the moon and Mars in the future?
Well, it's really all about making human space flight affordable. And what you want for that is a 100% reusable rocket. Now, Falcon is only partially reusable, but Starship is going to be 100% reusable, and we've actually already started working with NASA on using Starship to send astronauts to the surface of the moon for the first time since 1972. Not only that, Starship will be refuelable on orbit, and the combination of those two things will let us send people basically anywhere in the solar system with more payload for less money than I think people have really been contemplating. I think for the first time we can seriously talk about things like lunar bases, or what SpaceX cares about most, a self-sustaining civilization on Mars.
Right. So what you're saying is I will have an opportunity soon to get on board one of those spaceships.
I very much hope so. Yeah.
So speaking of reusability and landing, I know you mentioned Starship will be refuelable in orbit, but Falcon does come back and land back on Earth. What are the challenges with actually landing on the moon and landing on a planet like Mars?
Yeah, well, you can't land like a plane because the moon and the Mars either have no atmosphere or have a very thin atmosphere, and even if you could, there's no runway that someone's built for you. So that's one of the reasons that we do propulsive landing on Falcon, because we want to figure out how to do propulsive landing. That fundamental architecture works on basically any planet. If you have no atmosphere like the moon, you do a propulsive landing burn all the way. If you have a thick atmosphere like Earth, you let the atmosphere slow you down as you float down and do a short landing burn at the end. And for Mars, which has an atmosphere but a very thin one, you do something in between the two.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds really difficult, and I'm sure there has been a lot of effort put into that. Can you tell us anything about what we're working on now to get us to a point where we can do a landing like that in such a harsh environment?
Yeah, so figuring out propulsive landing is really the key part of it. But what people may not realize is that every time we bring Falcon back, we do something called an entry burn. So just before we hit the atmosphere, we light the engines to slow the rocket down. That happens high up where the air is very thin, and it just so happens that the conditions there are very similar to what a Mars landing burn would look like. So even though it takes months to get to Mars, and you can only do it every 2 years when the planets line up, we effectively get to practice Mars propulsive landing every time we bring Falcon back, including, hopefully, today.
Wow. And as you mentioned, every time we bring Falcon back, we learn something new. Can you tell us a little bit more about what we learn after the vehicle has returned and we're able to check out the vehicle?
Yeah, so Jessica actually mentioned this earlier, that I talked about how cost is really one benefit of reusability, but reliability is the other benefit. I mean, imagine that you do all this planning to send a rocket up through the rigors of launch and re-entry, but you don't get to see the rocket afterwards. And what we would like to do with reusability, what we've been able to do with Falcon 9, is see the rocket, inspect it, and because of that, we've been able to correlate our models pre-flight to what actually happens when you launch, re-enter, and land a rocket.
Right, instead of just guessing what happened to the vehicle after it's left. Exactly. That is amazing. Well, thank you again for joining us today for a second round. Hopefully the weather works with us today in a couple of hours, actually. Let's throw it back to KSC with Marie.
All right, actually, we have Lauren here. Now, today's mission opens up the door to one day allowing the general public to be able to visit places like the moon and Mars. And as you've heard through several interviews today, reusability is a really, really important part of that. Imagine if every time you flew a plane from LA to New York, you threw it away at the end of the flight. That would mean essentially airline travel would be too expensive, costing hundreds of millions of dollars a flight, and almost no one would be able to fly. And so that's what SpaceX is trying to do here with reuse, allowing not just a handful of people to be able to go to space, but tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of regular folks like you and me to be able to go to space. So, myself, when people like me have a chance to go, I know my dream is to land on Jupiter's moon, Europa. Scientists believe that there is a liquid water ocean underneath the ice and that it has the potential to be habitable. And so I'm super excited to get up close and personal to maybe some space fish. Leland, what about you? Where would you go?
Wow, that's a pretty interesting destination. I think I would like to go to Mars. We've studied Mars so much and looked at it, and I think maybe having a Martian base that is dog friendly, bring the pups along, because I think as we explore, we want to take our families, our cultures, our traditions, with us, and flying with Doug and Bob is cool, but having more people,
There's the dogs.
The puppers, taking the
dogs.
puppers to space. I mean, they're not.
They look ready to go.
They are ready to go. We just needed maybe some like SpaceX type suits for them, But it's that's what it's all about, exploration. Like the settlers going the west, they took everything with them, and they started these new communities and these new traditions. And I think that's what we do with space travel. We start new traditions and communities and bring everyone together as one family, one civilization.
Absolutely. We're here for it. And knowing that the opportunity to fly to space as a private citizen is really just right around the corner, we have a new poll question on Twitter for you. If given the opportunity to fly to the moon, now we're talking the moon, would you fly to the South Pole where no one has ever been, or would you go to the Apollo 11 landing site? So those are going to be some interesting answers.
And while there is not a ton of cargo on today's mission, Dragon is carrying 2 very special payloads, aside from Bob and Doug, of course. The first of those payloads is a series of custom art pieces entitled Humankind by Los Angeles artist Tristan Eaton. These indestructible, double-sided paintings made from gold, brass, and aluminum celebrate how far humanity has come, as well as how far we still have to go. It includes a beautiful homage to the Saturn V rocket, as well as a nod to Bob and Doug's current ride to space. And you can find more images and information about these pieces on SpaceX's social channels. Next, in the spirit of inspiring the next generation of explorers, we wanted to celebrate the class of 2020, from kindergarten all the way to graduate school. So SpaceX and NASA invited students from around the world to submit their photo to fly on America's first human spaceflight in nearly a decade. Each graduate's photo was used to create a mosaic image of our beautiful planet Earth, which we printed, and it's now being flown aboard Bob and Doug's flight on the Crew Dragon spacecraft. We received nearly 100,000 photos. That's a ton, so thank you, and congratulations, graduates.
Yeah, I've got a couple of family members and friends who submitted their photos, so they're super excited about seeing their faces go to space in that beautiful mosaic. That was really cool.
And again, that's what it's all about, everyone coming together with their experiences and bringing them forward to space. And I think regular people flying to space, where SpaceX is going to be flying, non-government people, non-military people, but people that have a desire to explore and do new things and traditions off planet, as we say sometimes.
Yeah, all this time since we've had the International Space Station, it's been government astronauts performing the research because you're the only ones we've been able to send, right? But
we've had some tourists, though. We've had people that paid their way on a Soyuz rocket.
Sure.
Go. But it's really the Billionaire Boys Club. That's what Pharrell talks about with, it costs so much money to go to space, and I think that price point will come down as we make this more amenable for everyday people.
Absolutely.
And eventually being able to fly artists and musicians and poets, people can tell the story of what they've seen out there in a way that really connects to the soul of people down on Earth, so they feel inspired to go.
Exactly.
Now, following today's mission, we will be one step closer to a future where we can all have that opportunity to gain the orbital perspective and explore new worlds. In just over an hour from now, Bob and Doug will be the first people to launch on an American vehicle in almost a decade. And for the SpaceX team, if I can try to speak for all of us, which is impossible, but I will say it has been an absolute honor to have the opportunity today to have this stage to show the world what we've poured our hearts into over the years with our partners at NASA. And it's just deeply humbling to know that the agency and that Bob and Doug have entrusted us with this critical mission. The responsibility that's on our shoulders is huge, and we're just so grateful to be here today.
Absolutely, and I know that our NASA teams really share in that sentiment. We heard from just a handful of them earlier when Bob and Doug were riding out to the launch pad. But there's so many people that we're probably never going to see or hear from on the public stage, but that have poured their hearts and souls, as you said, into this mission. All the engineers up late hours checking, double checking, triple checking everything to troubleshoot and solve problems and get us to this point. So it's just really awesome that we've made it to this point.
When you think about legacy, Katherine Johnson, who helped get John Glenn to space, her daughters are watching right now. Mm-hmm. And that legacy going forward to the future of space travel is powerful.
Wow. And we heard from two icons of science and exploration on Wednesday, and we couldn't resist sharing these shout outs with you one more time.
Wow, we're making history again. The NASA program. I'm there with you guys in spirit. Bob, Doug, good luck. I know you'll be fine. I'll be watching and got everything crossed, arms, legs. I'm tied in a knot. Can't wait for you to get back safely.
This is the first time a U.S.-built rocket has taken people into space in 9 years. It's quite an accomplishment. So for us at the Planetary Society, more rockets means more exploration. More people in space means more exploration. More countries involved in the endeavor of spaceflight means more exploration. This is how we know the cosmos and our place within it. So congratulations, SpaceX. Here's wishing your team, and the crew especially, a safe journey and the joy of discovery. Let's go.
So great to hear from William Shatner and Bill Nye, two very recognizable faces following along on the mission.
Yeah.
And we want to go over to Dan and Jesse in Hawthorne, where we are now just 1 hour and 18 minutes from launch. Dan, Jesse?
Hey, thanks, Marie. Yeah, 1 hour, 18 minutes. I think we're tying ourselves in knots, just like Captain Kirk. We're really hoping the weather cooperates. In about 20 minutes or so, we might clear. So we're getting hopeful. We're getting our hopes up.
Yes. Very excited. Again, we're T-minus 1 hour and 18 minutes from launch, and the anticipation is real over here. Since arriving at the spacecraft, Bob and Doug were helped by our closeout engineers to get into their seats, attach their suits to special umbilicals that provide breathing air, pressurized nitrox, and a communications link to Dragon systems. They conducted leak checks, which were successful, and communications checks with the Corps here in Hawthorne, which is the person who will speak to them directly throughout the mission, as well as the launch director in Florida. This is where they are checking their comm path through both ground stations and the tracking and data relay satellites that we'll use to talk to the crew the entire way to the station.
And after all of those suit leak checks were successful, the closeout team was able to get out of the Dragon capsule and seal up that hatch, which also got its own leak check and was confirmed successful. At this point, the closeout team is out of the pad. They're away from the BDA, the blast danger area, and weather operators are about to kick off their final checks on wind speeds at the pad, which are going to be used during the final go, no go for launch. So we're all keeping eyes on the weather right now. Before we get to that final go, no go, all the various teams at both NASA and SpaceX are going to do internal go polls, just making sure conditions are right with Falcon 9, the Dragon, the crew, the range, and the space station before the final go is given. So let's check back in with the man over in Houston, Gary, for a status and the team supporting the space station for their readiness for launch.
Thanks, Dan. The team here in Mission Control Houston remains go for launch. We're also very hopeful about that weather. All systems on board the station that are required to be healthy for this mission are continuing to look good. Chris Cassidy is wrapping up his workday and will be watching Bob and Doug launch here in just under an hour. So station power and communication systems are normal. Computers and networks used for monitoring Dragon's approach have been checked out, and the cabins and the station cabin's atmosphere and pressure are as expected and ready to welcome 2 new crew members aboard. Mission Control will be closely monitoring Bob and Doug's flight and checking off milestones for most of the flight, And this very same team will be coming back tomorrow to be ready when Dragon gets in range of the International Space Station and we begin integrated operations and prepare for Dragon's docking. So I'll send it back. International Space Station team here is ready for launch. Go Falcon 9, go Dragon, and Godspeed to Bob and Doug.
All right, thanks, Gary. If you are just now joining us, you picked a really good time. We're just a little over an hour to launch. And welcome to our coverage for the mission known as Demonstration Mission 2, or Demo 2. Liftoff time still holding for 3:22 p.m. Eastern. Tracking no issues with Falcon 9 or Dragon. Everything good with the range so far. We're just really keeping an eye on that weather. Over the last 3 hours, our crew members, Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken, donned their SpaceX suits in the historic crew quarters suit-up room. After that, they walked out of crew quarters, just as every astronaut to fly from space from this port has done since Apollo 7. And then they were transported over to the pad, where the crew members entered the SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft that we're looking in live.
Today is a historic launch. It will be the first time a commercially built spacecraft will launch people into orbit and the first time the U.S. has sent people to the space station from American soil since 2011 with the retirement of the Space Shuttle program. Over the next hour, we will conduct a series of polls to get ready for launch, have Bob and Doug arm the launch escape system, and begin fueling Falcon 9. Launch is set for 3:22 p.m. Eastern. This will include a 12-minute flight to orbit and then a 19-hour flight to dock with the International Space Station tomorrow morning.
Today's mission is the culmination of years of work between teams at SpaceX and NASA. Demo 2 is going to be an end-to-end flight test starting with this launch today, going on to dock with the space station tomorrow, and then splashing down at the end of their mission. And this is going to be the final test for NASA to certify SpaceX for regular crew flights to the space station.
We've been hearing a little bit from the crew on board Dragon, which you can see on your right screen. They are currently strapped into their seats and already through communications and leak checks. They're able to follow all the milestones still ahead on those display panels just above them, getting insight into all Dragon and Falcon 9 systems as we proceed towards launch. So at T-minus 1 hour and 13 minutes, let's check in with John I for a status update on the vehicles. What's the update, John?
Thanks, Jesse. Well, not much to add to what Dan and Jesse just brought up. We've had a smooth countdown this afternoon. SpaceX team is working no issues as the pace begins to pick up here in the last 70 minutes. On Falcon 9, we did get the team on console. Earlier, you heard the comm checks between the responsible engineers and the crew. The engineers will be making calls on ascent for the crew's benefit, so they want to make sure that they could hear them before we go. The propulsion checkouts of the first and second stages are beginning right now. We're watching them begin to go through the process, opening valves. That check will go for about another 10 minutes, and that'll be our last one until propellant loading. Now the team will assess readiness for launch with a final go-no-go poll at T-minus 45 minutes, and that'll be followed by propellant loading starting at T-minus 35 minutes. Now earlier today, Dragon operators also performed a series of checkouts of Dragon's flight systems. The spacecraft is also currently go for launch. Our NASA crew, astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken, are currently inside Dragon. The hatch is closed. The SpaceX ground crew has left the tower. The next major event for Dragon is retract to the crew access arm that you can see currently alongside the capsule. That'll happen somewhere between T-minus 45 and T-minus 42 minutes. Now the range is currently clear for launch from historic Pad 39A. The worldwide network of ground stations and the tracking and data relay satellites are ready to support Dragon as it heads into orbit. The weather, that's the one concern. We will get a weather brief at T-minus 1 hour, so just under 12 minutes from now. Currently, the ground and upper altitude winds are go, so that's one thing that we can check as green. At the current time, we did have some rain earlier that appears to have let up, but we are red on conditions for both the electric field at surface levels, lightning, and cumulus clouds. There is a expectation that a forecast that'll be coming up at about T-minus 1 hour also may give us clearance of those conditions. So everything is focusing now on the weather brief at T-minus 1 hour. Also, we should hope to hear about the final check on the ascent corridor. That's the weather along the Atlantic seaboard in case Dragon had to abort on the way to space. The conditions there have been marginal, but the expectation that it would be good for launch. But we will get all of that coming up here very shortly prior to entering propellant load. Now today we are aiming for a launch at 3:22:45 p.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time, or 19 hours, 22 minutes, 45 seconds Universal Time. Once we begin loading propellant, there's no opportunity to change T0. So once propellant is loading, we're committed, and we'll get one chance at it today. But currently at T-minus 1 hour, 10 minutes, and 30 seconds, everything except the weather is go for launch.
Thanks, John, for that detailed update. We've got an extensive history now of flying Falcon 9 from the Florida coast, and just last year completed a test run of the mission. We're less than an hour from beginning here today.
The purpose of that mission was to demonstrate Dragon's capability to safely and reliably fly to and from the International Space Station. The success of Demo 1 was a really exciting moment,
Falcon
paved the
9,
way
Falcon
for
1,
today's
please,
mission to where we are today. And right now we're getting ready to fly U.S. astronauts from U.S. soil for the first time since 2011.
Dragon and Falcon 9 together have years of operational experience, or what we refer to as flight heritage. As I mentioned earlier, SpaceX has successfully completed 21 flights of Dragon to and from orbit since 2010, including 20 trips to the International Space Station. Not only have we conducted thousands of hours of testing, we've also enhanced and added a number of safety features to Dragon.
Much of what was learned with the Cargo Dragon was leveraged in the design of this new vehicle. It's fully autonomous, which means it can basically fly itself, but also features that full manual override capability just in case of emergency.
Many of the other enhancements help towards SpaceX's goal of reusability and less refurbishment time between missions. So let's take a closer look at these advancements.
Standing at almost 27 feet tall, from the very bottom of the trunk to the very top of the nose cone, Crew Dragon's comprised of two main elements. You have the capsule, which is designed to hold crew and pressurized cargo, and then you have the trunk, which holds unpressurized cargo as well as having a solar array and radiator.
And the nose cone at the top of the capsule protects the docking system as well as the guidance navigation control system, or what we call GNC. The nose cone opens for docking and remains attached to the Crew Dragon spacecraft, and that's unlike the previous version of Dragon, and that helps towards our reusability efforts.
Completely opposite the nose cone is that trunk. It has attachment points for Falcon 9, the Dragon capsule, and it can hold cargo. On the very outside of the trunk, one half of it contains a radiator that rejects heat from the active thermal control system into space. That's the white part, and that uses SpaceX's new picotiling technology. The other half contains the solar cells used to charge the spacecraft's batteries.
And though we only have 2 astronauts on board today, the spacecraft is actually designed to accommodate up to 7 crew members with modular seats that can be removed and replaced by additional cargo. The seats are made of carbon fiber and are custom sized for any crew member flying on board.
The control panel centered right between the pilot and the commander seats and has those 3 touchscreen displays that gives the crew insight into Dragon and even the ability to operate the vehicle and fly it manually.
And finally, our Super Draco launch escape system is a key safety feature of Crew Dragon, giving the crew the ability to safely escape from the time of launch all the way to orbit.
And as we look to the future beyond this test flight later this year, the first operational crewed mission for NASA will take place. NASA astronauts Mike Hopkins.
Try to review your launch commit criteria and indicate readiness at the appropriate time. Step 5469 for propellant load and launch.
That's a good sign. That was the launch director. We're getting ready to pull the teams as we move towards that go, no go for propellant loading, which happens at about 45 minutes before launch. But back to our Crew 1 mission, NASA astronauts Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, and Shanna Walker, and Suichi Noguchi of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA, were chosen to support this mission.
And again, it's called Crew 1.
But today, Doug Hurley is the spacecraft commander for this mission. He previously flew on 2 space shuttle missions as the pilot on STS-127 and STS-135, which was the final space shuttle flight. Here's a closer look at Doug Hurley.
Excited?
Very excited. Yeah, very excited.
You feel ready? Still pumped?
Oh yeah, I think we're ready. I think we're certainly ready.
Joining the SpaceX Demo 2 test. He is a Marine Corps colonel and test pilot. He was selected as an astronaut in 2000. He piloted Space Shuttle Endeavour and Atlantis for STS-135, the final space shuttle mission. Introducing NASA astronaut Doug Hurley.
It's a life-changing process in so many ways to fly into space. It's just overwhelming in some respects. Just the sensations, the rumbling, the shaking, the acceleration. My name is Doug Hurley, and I'm the spacecraft commander for the Demo 2 mission to the International Space Station. This will be the first time the Dragon had a crew on board, and so there's a myriad of objectives we want to achieve for this mission. What would work on orbit, what might not work on orbit, what would definitely work. To be able to just have the entire integrated team that's going to support us getting to and from space station, it was really neat being part of it. You know, we are the lucky ones that get to fly it, but we certainly not for 1 second take for granted the amount of effort that so many other people had to put into this to make it successful.
For Doug personally, he's worked so hard, I mean, through his entire life, to get to where we are right now. As a test pilot, this would be the dream to fly a new vehicle. So it makes me so happy to see that he gets to be part of this mission, the spacecraft commander. I'm just glad to see his hard work and his dream has come true for that.
It's been a long road in a lot of ways for not only us, but certainly for all the folks that work in the Commercial Crew Program, as well as SpaceX in our case, just working to get to this point.
We're a little over 1 hour, 3.5 minutes away from launch. Now let's learn a little bit more about the man sitting next to Doug Hurley inside Dragon, NASA astronaut Bob Behnken.
My career at NASA has kind of spanned a couple of decades at this point. I arrived with the class of 2000, went through the training program, primarily focused on the space shuttle and the International Space Station, learning those systems. Having launched a couple times on vehicles, you know, the second time was definitely different than the first time. You can feel a little bit guilty of, hey, should I study one more thing, or is there one more piece of information I should get? Am I really prepared or not? So that's definitely different between where I was on my first flight and where I'm at right now.
For me personally, as a spouse, watching everything that Bob has put into this over the last 5 years, the dedication that he's shown, the perseverance is pretty special. For both of us, though, the way our minds work, it won't be until sort of the mission is complete that you have really a chance to savor it and celebrate it. This is a huge accomplishment for an Air Force flight test engineer to be part of the demonstration mission of a brand new vehicle. It's going to be amazing.
Without a partner that has that same appreciation, I think it can be challenging for some folks. There's a lot of work and a lot of time that takes away from family that that my spouse appreciates, and I love her for that. On a deeply personal level, I'm really excited that my son is get a chance to see me launch into space. Being an astronaut has been a little bit of an abstraction thing for him because he's seen me do it in old videos, but he hasn't seen me do it for real. And so I'm excited for him to see this launch. Really, my role on the Demo 2 mission is to make sure that we get this vehicle tested and evaluated so that we can move on to more operational missions at the International Space Station. We've got a lot of objectives on board the vehicle that we need to accomplish to really make sure that it's good to go. We'll make sure all those systems are working during the test flight so that the future missions will have them available even if they don't plan to utilize them. Through years of the NASA team, I'm helping to share that experience and teaching them the lessons that we've learned by going through this. Now there's another capability in the U.S. besides NASA to operate something of this magnitude. I want to thank the entire Commercial Crew Program team that's worked together to get to this point where we've got vehicles in the launch pad ready to head to the International Space Station.
If we look even further into the not-so-distant future, flying on a mission to space will be an option for more people as SpaceX plans to also fly private astronauts on board Dragon. Earlier this year, SpaceX signed an agreement with the space tourism company Space Adventures to fly up to 4 passengers on an orbital trip aboard Dragon as early as next year. And of course, it's NASA that is making private astronaut missions to the space station a possibility. We are looking forward to these missions, and we hope that you guys are all too.
All right, we are just 20 seconds away from T-minus 1 hour. This is going to be a really big moment that everyone's going to want to listen to. We're expecting a weather update, obviously hoping that the weather is improving, and so we should find out in the next 10 seconds or so. So we're going to stand by for a moment and wait for the Corps to give Bob and Doug a call, and then we'll all hear
Dragon,
the latest.
SpaceX, we're at T-minus 1 hour. You are go for Section 6. When ready, report go for launch.
We'll put it in work.
And that right there was a call for the crew to refer to some of their procedures. They do some final checks. You can see them checking harnesses, checking helmets, just making sure that they're strapped in and ready to go. And once they're done with that, the crew will report their readiness for launch.
SpaceX Dragon in 6.4. Bob and I are go for launch.
Copy, go for launch. And next up will be go no GoPro at T-minus 45.
Dragon copies.
All right, the crew is go for launch. So we are inside of 1 hour, still waiting for the weather update. But I mean, this day is one for the history books. We're returning crewed launches to station from American soil on American rockets. It's been almost 9 long years since we retired the space shuttle program. I remember that day. I'm going to remember this day. It's been a long road to get here, countless hours by thousands of dedicated professionals from NASA and SpaceX.
It's been an exciting week, but this last final hour is just so exciting right now. Today's mission will be Crew Dragon's second test flight and its first test with humans on board. It's been an awesome countdown so far. Weather, we're still waiting for that update, so it's still a watch item, but the crew is go for launch. So at T-minus 45 minutes, hopefully we'll get an update on that weather.
We've had a really clean countdown so far. It started with suit up just over 3 hours ago. The SpaceX team helping Bob and Doug put on their suits, conducting initial checkouts, including an initial pressure and leak check before they got to the actual walkout. And all of that done in that operations and checkout facility. The crew walkout was where Bob and Doug gave their final... All right. Well, we do want to thank Marie, the entire KSC team, for that great launch. Marie, Lauren, Leland, it was great being with you guys the whole time. But as we just said, the mission has only now just begun. Right now, Bob and Doug are flying free inside of Dragon after that successful separation from Falcon 9. We've got just under 19 hours until they arrive at the space station. We're going to be here with you the entire trip.
Immediately after Dragon separated from Falcon 9, it began what we call activation and rendezvous phase of the mission. During this phase, Dragon is configured for on-orbit operations. The phase begins after separation of Dragon from Falcon 9 and ends with the completion of the final co-elliptic burn. Our initial orbit today is 190 kilometers by 205 kilometers, with those values representing the perigee and apogee of the orbit, or the lowest and highest points over the Earth. That means the orbit isn't a perfect circle, but more like a slight ellipse.
Over the next 19 hours, Dragon's going to execute a series of burns which will gradually raise its orbit to align more closely with the station. There are going to be 5 major burns or firing of those Draco thrusters on Dragon that are going to bring it close to station before we begin our final approach maneuvers. The first one is coming up in just a little bit, and it's the phase burn. Right now, teams are doing their go-no-go to get ready for that, and it's performed at the first apogee, or the highest point, of the initial orbit, and that's going to raise Dragon's perigee to a higher altitude.
And after a calculated time, which is based on what our orbital data shows us, the boost burn raises Dragon's orbit until it's just 10 kilometers lower than the space station, followed soon after by the close co-elliptic burn to place Dragon on orbit roughly co-elliptic with the space station. This means Bob and Doug will be about 10 kilometers lower than the station during their entire orbit around the Earth. The fourth maneuver is the transfer burn, where we raise Dragon's apogee, or highest point of its orbit, to just 2.5 kilometers below the station. And we round everything out with a final co-elliptic burn to once again maintain a constant orbit beneath station. It's just 2.5 kilometers below.
Then we get into the approach initiation and final stages of Dragon's rendezvous with the space station. This is also where we start what we call joint operations between the Dragon control team here in Hawthorne and the space station flight controllers in Mission Control Houston. The teams transition to those integrated ops roughly 45 minutes prior to approach initiation, which is another burn that really means Dragon's getting close. During the approach, SpaceX flight controllers work in tandem with the NASA team in Houston to activate and test out a number of systems on Dragon, including establishing bidirectional communications with the station using a system known as C2V2, which stands for Common Communications for Visiting Vehicles. They also set up a data stream from Dragon to the station, just giving another path for Dragon telemetry or data about its performance to come down to the ground and giving an additional command capability to astronauts on board the station. They'll also maneuver Dragon to the proper attitude and then initialize the navigation sensors used for that very slow and methodical approach to station.
At approximately 5:24 a.m. Pacific time, that's tomorrow morning, Draco thrusters on Dragon will fire for the approach initiation burn when Dragon is about 2.5 kilometers below station and just about 7 kilometers behind it. This will swing Dragon up until it is about 400 meters directly below the station, and this maneuver will also move Dragon inside one of those 2 safety zones around the station that requires a set of go-no-go polls with the different control teams. The first zone is called the approach ellipsoid, which is an imaginary shape measuring about 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, which is essentially a large 3-dimensional oval. Before Dragon is given permission to move inside the ellipsoid, referred to by the teams as the AE, it is configured to be on what is known as a 24-hour safe trajectory. This means that if Dragon lost all control...
SpaceX for update.
If Dragon lost all control to its thrusters, it would be at least 24 hours before its trajectory would move inside the approach ellipsoid.
Okay, for suit doffing, we're still waiting for cabin to be below 25C and trending down. It looks like it's on the way there, but not quite. And the second item is during the burn, we may have intermittent comm and due to pointing, and this is expected.
We're just listening.
Coach, copy the cabin temp and suit doffing and intermittent comm during the burn.
Good read back, and we are go for the phase burn. Looks like it's in about 12 minutes.
Dragon, go for the phase burn.
We're just getting a couple of quick updates. They're still wearing those suits that they've been in since we saw them suit up in the O&C building several hours ago. Once temperature just comes down inside the cabin a little bit, they'll get to go to doff or just take their suits off. And you just heard we're less than 12 minutes now from that first burn called the phase burn. Getting back to where we're going to be tomorrow, though, once Dragon arrives at just 400 meters below the station, it's going to be what's known as Waypoint 0, and that's the first checkpoint during our approach. The vehicle can hold at 400 meters, or it can continue on if all the systems check out, and then it'll begin the approach to Waypoint 1. By this point, the teams will do a go, no-go for Dragon to move inside the keep-out sphere. It's another one of those zones around the station, and it's an imaginary sphere with a radius of about 200 meters. It's just another chance to confirm all the guidance, navigation, and control systems are working correctly on Dragon before we move it in really close to station. And it carries a similar requirement to the AE that Jesse talked about, where if Dragon lost all control of its thrusters, it would not go inside of that sphere for at least 4 orbits or about 6 hours instead of the 24 hours for the approach ellipsoid.
Dragon's move from Waypoint 0 to Waypoint 1 will swing it up and out in front of the station, pausing at a distance of approximately 220 meters. At this point, it will be on what we call the docking axis, which essentially means it is directly in front of the docking port. Bob and Doug are headed to the forwardmost port of the International Space Station, the Node 2 forward port. That is where Dragon docked last year on the Demo 1 mission and where one of the 2 international docking adapters is located. These were installed for new commercial spacecraft flights and any other future spacecraft that also use the international docking standard.
Before moving into the final waypoint, the crew will execute their second manual flight test, except this time they'll be in what we call the near field. That just means they're close to the station. The crew will actually command a hold when they're 220 meters away from the station and conduct a series of maneuvers. So it'll be Doug and Bob at the controls. First, they'll fly Dragon to the center line of the docking approach, just precisely lining it up with that docking port. Then they'll do a number of translational maneuvers, so using the Draco thrusters on Dragon to move it around the different axes. And then they'll always be checking in with the ground on how much propellant is used. Again, translational is just you're moving back, forward, side to side. When we refer to attitude maneuvers, it's where you're pointing. But once they're complete with that, they'll transition control back over to the Dragon flight computer to resume that automated docking.
And once Dragon is only 20 meters away from Waypoint 2, that the spacecraft focuses on aligning its docking system with the docking adapter. Dragon will then fly in and make contact with the IDA, giving us what we call a soft capture. The soft capture ring then retracts until sensors indicate it's time for hooks to drive in place to give us a hard capture and firmly secure Dragon to the station. Then it's time for leak checks and hatch opening, which is currently timelined to come about 2 hours following docking.
We're going to be here with you the entire way, and again, it's going to be a 2-team effort once Dragon gets really close. So why don't we jump over to Gary, International Space Houston. It's got to be exciting seeing that launch and knowing that they're on the way to you. How's the team doing, Gary?
Dan, there is allotment from the room. We are closely monitoring Dragon's few burns that are coming up here. You both did a great job of describing some of those. From the International Space Station side of things, we're really in a monitor mode for much of the flight. Once it gets closer to some of the docking portion of the flight that you were going through, that's when we'll start really kicking into gear for joint operations. Just when the Dragon is just about 80 kilometers away, we'll start doing our checkouts of a system called C2V2. That's the communication system. Dragon, through the most of its flight, will be talking or communicating with the TDRS satellites, the geosynchronous satellites around the Earth. Right about the 80-kilometer part, we'll be turning on the C2V2. That is the common communication for visiting vehicles and establishes a link between the International Space Station and Dragon. It'll be turned on for some S-band connections and testing some of the radio signals as Dragon makes its approach. Really, though, we'll be monitoring the approach through some of those final burns once it's in front of the International Space Station. The space station has a few things that it needs to do from the attitude control side of things to really prepare the station for docking, switching some of the thrusters over to the Russian side and really relying on those control moment gyros and the angular momentum there to keep the International Space Station nice and steady. Once it makes its approach, it'll really be up to Bob and Doug to perform those final maneuvers and into docking. Chris Cassidy, though, will be monitoring from the inside. He's got a tool called the RPOP, and he'll be monitoring the approach from the inside of the International Space Station. Chris Cassidy, through the past couple days, has been preparing right between the hatch where Bob and Doug will enter the International Space Station. Everything's still looking good from the space station side of things. We should be exiting a loss of communication now and going back and getting some views from stations. Still having great views from Bob and Doug incrementally. We'll be following right along through the duration of this flight until it docks just 19 hours from now. That's it from us in here in Mission Control Houston. Dan, I'll stand it back to you over in Hawthorne.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Now joining me here in Hawthorne, though, we'll get her a second to get mic'd up and everything, but SpaceX's Kate Tice, who was with us for Demo 1, we got to do the splashdown together. Now we're going to do kind of that initial flight on orbit with Bob and Doug. So, Kate, thanks for jumping in.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Tice. I'm a senior engineer here at SpaceX. Really excited to be joining you for the Demo 2 webcast here with Dan, like he said, in front of mission headquarters here in Hawthorne. So, like he was saying before, Dragon is going to be performing a couple of different things going on in the next few hours. We're going to have 5 major burns, but at the moment we are coming up to the first burn, which is the phase burn.
And that's going to be, again, the first firing of those thrusters, those Draco thrusters. It'll be using both the forward bulkhead, so the ones that were uncovered by that nose cone, and also the ones around the service section or around kind of the bottom portion. And we've been looking at our timeline, and it's expected to last about 492 seconds is what they have it in there. So it's going to be a fairly long firing. And again, these are done just to gradually raise up the orbit. So essentially what we're doing is we're waiting until we're at the highest point of our orbit over the Earth. We're firing the thrusters, and that raises up the lowest point of our orbit. And then we just circle everything out with what we call a co-elliptic burn once we get back to that other side of the orbit. So they're going to just gradually do that over the coming hours until they're at the International Space Station. And then it's time for docking.
Yeah. So, like Dan said, we have a total of 12 a total of 12 Draco thrusters on board of Dragon. In addition to the 4 bulkhead Draco thrusters, which we'll be using upcoming, there are 12 more Dracos in the service section, which is the area along the lower part of the Dragon capsule. These will be used in every burn and are primarily there to help maintain Dragon's attitude, which is especially important when doing the finely tuned approach into docking. Now, they can also be used for smaller translational maneuvers, but right now we're approaching the phase burn, and that should be about 3 minutes.
Yep. So we're just going to continue to stand by, wait for that phase burn. That'll be the first major on-orbit event since they've done all of their checkouts and the nose cone is open. And then we'll be standing by. We should be having the first manual flight test coming up in just about 50 minutes from now if everything goes well. So that'll be our first chance to watch Bob and Doug actually fly Dragon. And so, I mean, that's going to be really cool. Again, it's designed to fly itself the entire time, but it's the crew has the ability to step in should they need it, and they'll actually be stepping in and taking control. So they'll be flying a brand new spacecraft for the very first time.
Yeah, something that I like to remind my friends and family, as we've been leading up to this launch for the last several days, this is a demonstration mission, and so like that far-field manual flight test that we'll have coming up a little bit later, Bob and Doug, they're test pilots. This kind of mission is what they live for. for. If I remember correctly, it was 1981. Shuttle Columbia was the last time that we tested a completely new vehicle. So it's been a long time since anybody has had the opportunity to do a test flight like Bob and Doug are doing today and will be continuing to do for the next 19 hours. So that opportunity for them
Dragon SpaceX for suit-offing plan.
That opportunity for them to take control of the Dragon capsule if, for some reason that they need to, that is one of the test objectives.
Yeah, we're right now, cabin environments are stable. Our plan is to give you the go for suit-offing after the phase burn. And we are seeing Draco Orbit 2, Draco 4 is a little bit a low temperature out of family. We're not tracking any immediate concerns, but just wanted to make you aware that we are looking into that.
Okay, copy that, SpaceX. We'll plan on suit doffing after the burn, and then the Orbit 2 Drake 4's low temp.
Good readback.
All right, so the crew is going to stay in their suits until after this phase burn, which we should be hearing start in just about a minute from now. We should be just 10
GNC
seconds
confirms
away
good
from
deorbit
this
burn.
burn. And we have confirmation the first burn is in progress. Again, this is the first of the 5 major maneuvers. This one's called the phase burn, using those forward bulkhead thrusters. So just those 4 Dracos at the very top underneath the nose cone to do these what we call delta V maneuvers. So just big changes in velocity that we're going to do to gradually raise this orbit up over the coming hours. So we're watching some of the screens. We're able to see the burn is in progress. It's expected to last for several minutes, so we'll just keep an ear out, make sure that everything goes well, and then we'll get a report pretty much the same time the crew does on how the burn goes. So we're really just looking for those words, good burn, after it's complete.
Like we said, this is the first of 5 major burns that we will be performing over the coming hours. So this is basically the first major step in the free flight of Demo 2.
Expected loss of signal, Diego Garcia.
We're about 2 minutes into our phase burn. Everything looking good so far.
And Dragon SpaceX for awareness, burn is nominal so far.
All right, we have confirmation that burn is nominal thus far.
We concur, thank you.
And again, Bob and Doug have insight into how this is going the whole way just through those touchscreen control panel that they have right in front of them, those 3 screens. And when we get video inside the cabin back, hopefully as we're doing that manual flight test, you'll be able to get a really good close-up look at how they kind of have their window into Dragon itself. And we are coming up on 3 minutes into our first major burn for their on-orbit path to the station. You're just now joining, we are 3 minutes 45 seconds into the phase burn. This is the first major burn. You're getting a look inside of the SpaceX Mission Control Center here in Hawthorne. This is the team that's going to be responsible for looking over Dragon and Bob and Doug on their flight up to the International Space Station. We'll have some intermittent video comm with the Dragon spacecraft itself, only when we're over some ground stations and only when we're doing some of these different maneuvers. But right now, we're just continuing to listen in. That first burn's going well. Every single one of these burns is critical to actually making it to the International Space Station. So it seems like a pretty quiet time right now, but I mean, thrusters are firing on the Dragon spacecraft as we speak. They've been doing so for over 4.5 minutes. So we've got a little under 3 minutes to go, I think. Everything's looking good so far.
Dan, I remember during the Demo 1 splashdown or deorbit, basically leaving the International Space Station webcast, you know, we were going back and forth saying that it feels like it takes forever to do anything, and it's the same deal going up to the ISS. Everything is super controlled, very precise, and very exact in terms of timing and adjustments. So, like Dan said, this is a critical moment, and definitely one of the first exciting events that we have in Dragon, as it now is free flying.
And just to let you know, anytime we have video with the crew during the flight, we'll do our best to bring it to you. So we're just getting a quick check-in on the teams in Mission Control and Hawthorne. I mean, these are the people behind the scenes who have done so much just to get us to this day, taking part in simulations and mission planning with the crew themselves. I mean, you're talking countless hours just to really rehearse everything for this flight before we get here, and we're here.
Yeah.
We had that successful launch, which still haven't come down from. That was incredible, and everything has gone smoothly so far. Good initial orbit. The burn started right on time, and it sounds like it's going well so far. We are just almost 6 minutes into the burn, so should be just about a minute or so left.
Like you've heard us say many times on today's webcast, prior to launch and after launch, you know, Bob and Doug have rehearsed every single procedure with the SpaceX team for this mission. So everything that they're doing now and have done all day, despite the unfortunate scrub that we had earlier in the week, was just an extra practice test, which was awesome. But you know, it was nothing new for them. They had rehearsed everything, and same goes with this. All of the procedures that we are running through now, and will continue to run through all through the duration of the mission. Bob and Doug have, you know, they are super familiar with what's going to happen and what they're expected to do.
And we should be coming up near the end of the phase burn. Again, this is the first in 5. The next major one's going to be the boost burn. That's going to raise their orbit up to just about 10 kilometers below the station itself. And so they're just going to get closer and closer in these incremental steps. And you'll see in this graphic that when they do these burns, it looks like they're kind of doing a little bit of a loop-de-loop. This graph is in relation to the space station itself. So on one axis, the Y, you have how far below you are, and on the X, how far behind the station you still are. It's not perfectly to scale.
Dragon, SpaceX, nominal burn.
Nominal burn.
And we just heard the 2 words we were hoping for, nominal burn. So 1 burn out of 5 checked. And so that was the first one. The next one coming up is going to be the boost burn in about an hour and 24 minutes. Before they get to that, though, we are going to be looking forward to that manual flight test where they're going to be taking the reins and they're going to be taking control of Dragon itself.
Yeah, so in preparation for that moment, I highly encourage you all to check out the simulation that we have on SpaceX.com. It's actually an awesome opportunity for you to test your own skills at steering.
Hey, Dragon, SpaceX, we are disabling cameras, and you are go for suit doffing and on-orbit cabin configuration. Note that camera caps, which will be tethered, can be found in location 8, and cameras are currently configured.
Yeah, so as I was...
Okay, Dragon copy, suit doffing in work. We see that the cameras are off, and we can do on-orbit activation.
Copy all. And Dragon, also at your convenience, if you can confirm the gas detectors are off location 14.
Welcome.
Okay, so what's going on at this point is Bob and Doug now have the opportunity to take their suits off. This is referred to as doffing, as donning is actually putting the suits on. They'll actually be able to remove those suits at this time, get a little bit more comfortable in the cabin, and they'll be putting those suits back on when they get closer to the International Space Station. And like I was saying before, I highly encourage you all to check out the simulation that we have online where you can test out your skills at steering Dragon and docking it to the International Space Station. That website is iss.sim.spacex.com. And like I said, you can test your own skills at flying Dragon.
And Dragon SpaceX, one additional note, no need to reply, but the next burn will be the boost burn. And that's in about 1 hour and 23 minutes per your timeline.
All right.
With the copy, thank you.
Yeah, definitely give the Crew Dragon docking demonstration a try. It's a lot of fun. It gives you a pretty good appreciation of just how difficult it is to fly and maneuver in space when you're not just thinking about going forward and backward. You have every axis imaginable that you have to worry about. Took me a couple of tries. I know those first couple I got impatient and flew in way too quickly, and then one time started to spin pretty wildly out of control. So it's probably a good thing I'm down here and they're up there, but it's a lot of fun to check out.
Yeah, I was also really surprised at how many levels of control there are and how difficult it is to actually get them all to work in sync at the right speeds. Of everyone that I've spoken to that has tried it out first, it's unanimous. Everyone went too fast the first couple tries. I was the same. Although by my 3rd or 4th try, I'm happy to say that my decades of Star Fox 64 training finally paid off. And I did. I managed to dock to the station after practicing a few times.
SpaceX Dragon. Check.
And Dragon, you were a little broken, but I did copy you.
How about this time? How you hear on the cabin mic?
Loud and clear on the cabin mic.
Copy that.
We have you the same.
Well, with that first burn nominal and out of the way, the next one coming up in a little over an hour and 20 minutes from now, the next thing we're really going to be looking forward to is this manual free flight. So as we've said quite a bit, Crew Dragon is designed to fly fully autonomous, meaning the spacecraft does all of the navigating and burns to the station all on its own. There are manual override controls, though, on the spacecraft that enables the astronauts to step in, take control should any issues arise. And to test out those controls, Bob and Doug are about to do the first of 2 planned manual maneuvers inside Dragon.
So they'll be using the touchscreen controls that we've seen at various points in the webcast, the crew display panel, and they'll practice putting Dragon in what's known as LVLH attitude. LVLH, or local vertical, local horizontal configuration, means that they'll use Earth itself as a guide and reorient Dragon with the nose cone pointing forward and the bottom of Dragon, and at the bottom of Dragon, at least from where Bob and Doug are sitting, the Earth will be directly below them. So think of it as they'll basically be putting Dragon in the same orientation as an airplane flying over Earth.
And they'll be taking this manual control, but they'll stop one step before actually sending the command of their attitude adjustments to Dragon's flight computer. So the flight computer itself is still going to continue flying Dragon, and as soon as they're done, they'll hand control back over. The flight computer will reorient Dragon, and it will continue on its way. It's going to fly in a whole bunch of different attitudes on the way up to station. Unlike the space station pretty much only flies in that LVLH. It's pretty much always going the same direction. But that's because it's got very big joints for the solar arrays to rotate around. For Dragon, they'll have to maneuver the trunk to charge the batteries, maneuver to sometimes communicate with the different satellites, depending on which antennas they're using. And so this LVLH will just be a test for this manual flight test.
Exactly. And like we said before, there is that simulation online where you can check it out for yourself.
Yeah, definitely get a chance to go pilot Dragon. We're going to be seeing that tomorrow morning. It was surreal when we got to see it on Demo 1 with Dragon coming in. We've got some great cameras right on that docking port where Dragon's going to be pointed. It's going to be really exciting to see them come in for that final approach.
Dragon SpaceX, no response required, but we are going to be enabling branch 2 of the helium system. This is expected to be done on orbit to protect for a scrub. And Dragon SpaceX, this is just clarification. This will get us back into the expected on-orbit config.
Dragon copies.
Dragon SpaceX prop reconfiguration is complete and expected.
And if you're just now tuning in, you missed the launch, so you might want to head online and make sure you go back and check that out. But Bob Bank and Doug Hurley, our two NASA astronauts, are flying through outer space right now after that successful launch just a little while ago. We're going to be bringing you this ground track that you're looking at. You're going to be able to see exactly where Dragon is over planet Earth, and you're going to see a number of different lines, so usually 3 at a time. And so what that is showing is each of those orbits around planet Earth for the Dragon spacecraft. And it looks like it's wavy, but that's because you're taking a globe and then stretching it out flat. And so that's why it looks like, so it is a straight line if you were actually looking at it around the globe. So with that on-time launch, they've already traveled well away from the Kennedy Space Center. They're already downrange, way in excess of 600 miles. But they're going to continue to fly around the planet Earth. They're going to continue to raise their orbit over the next 19 hours. They were successful in doing so with their first burn, the phase burn. That was done.
And SpaceX Dragon for suit doffing. We started a timer for the drying of both suits about 4.5 minutes ago, if you guys want to back us up.
Copy. Timer started for suit drying 4.5 minutes ago. We'll back you up.
And that was the Demo 2 Commander Doug Hurley talking to the core behind us right here in Mission Control Hawthorne. The crew has doffed or gotten out of their spacesuits that they've been in for several hours now, and they kind of hang it up, almost like hanging up your clothes just to dry, and they're going to continue to they have a timer just to know when they're fine to just pack them away. They're not going to have to put those suits on again until tomorrow when it's time to dock with the space station.
Quick, I want to comment there on the view on the right-hand side of your screen. That is, if Bob and Doug were looking out the window, that's basically what they'd be seeing right now. That's a live shot from Dragon, and with planet Earth rotating below it.
Yeah, they're going to continue to make their way up over the next couple of hours. We have a number of items coming up for them, though. We are still counting down to that manual flight test. That should be coming up within the next half hour, and that's going to be Bob and Doug actually taking control of the Dragon spacecraft for the very first time. So that's going to be really exciting. Hopefully we'll get some video inside of the cabin. We'll have video inside the cabin anytime that the crew is ready for us to come on board. And anytime we have connection through ground stations, through SpaceX's worldwide network of ground stations to communicate with the spacecraft.
Yeah, and just real quick, I want to correct myself now that I can see the image a little better. That's actually a live shot from the International Space Station.
I thought it looked like a radiator.
Yeah, for a second I thought it was the Dragon trunk there. But nope, that is the ISS, so that's where Bob and Doug are heading. And like we have been saying so far, this is just the beginning of what is a 19-hour journey for them. So they've got a lot of stuff coming up. Like we've been saying, there are 5 main burns. We've completed the first of those 5 main burns, and they will be going to sleep in a while. Well, they'll eat first, and then they'll get to sleep. And that sleep portion of the mission is actually really important because we need them to be really well rested and comfortable whenever they start doing the approach phases to the International Space Station. So they get scheduled 8 hours, if I remember correctly. Yep. And I mean, you can see whenever we had the views inside of Dragon earlier, you can see that
SpaceX Dragon 4.300 is complete.
Copy. 4.300 complete.
So again, that's Bob and Doug just getting the cabin configured. They're out of their suits, getting a little bit more comfortable, and then hopefully we'll be getting to that manual flight test in just a little while. Yeah, they'll have about 8 hours of sleep scheduled. I don't know how you can go to sleep on a day like today, but I also don't know how they were as calm and collected as they were. So again, you're dealing with some special people when you're flying somebody into space.
For sure. And as we saw from our views inside the cabin earlier, they will be sitting in a sitting position while they're sleeping, whereas on the International Space Station, they have a flat bed, if you will, that they get strapped in. So the sleeping situation that they have for their ride on Dragon is definitely a little different than what they'll have on their longer stay on the International Space Station.
Just to walk you through quickly, we're looking live right now from Bob and Doug's destination, the International Space Station. They are scheduled to dock tomorrow, with that initial docking coming at 7:29 a.m. Pacific time. So over here on the West Coast, it'll be 10:29 a.m. over on the East Coast. It's about a 19-hour ride. It'll be 19 hours and 7 minutes if they dock directly on time from launch all the way to that docking. It'll take 5 successful burns to get them in close proximity to the International Space Station, followed by a number of smaller maneuvers during that rendezvous and that final approach sequence. But it's going to be a pretty lengthy trip for them to get there. And again, starting off from Kennedy Space Center just less than an hour ago, I think at this point. Time is starting to all flow together, but already moving in excess of 17,000 miles an hour as they continue to raise their orbit and chase down the space station. And once they get there, they're going to be joining the Expedition 63 crew already in progress. There's NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy's the current commander. He's on the right there of that photo. And then he was joined right now by 2 Russian cosmonauts, Anatoly Ivanishin and Ivan Wagner. They've been on board since they launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome just several weeks ago. Right now, only a 3-person crew on board. That's one of the major reasons we wanted to get this commercial crew capability online, because we're no longer flying 4 Soyuz spacecraft a year. We're only doing 2 a year. And so we need these commercial spacecraft, Dragon now in orbit, and eventually the Boeing Starliner to begin carrying larger crews up to orbit. So they're going to be joining them. Chris Cassidy, the current commander of the space station, is going to welcome Doug and Bob on board. They'll be residing inside what we call the USOS segment. It's kind of the half of the station.
Dragon SpaceX for suit drawing, low priority.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we just wanted confirmation that you are drawing suit 1 or suit 2 and seat 1. Just because we're not seeing telemetry from umbilical.
Yeah, that's affirmative. Suit, my suit from seat 2 is in seat 1, and it's hooked up, and we've verified airflow.
Copy. Thanks.
And at this point, the crew is out of their suits and they're drying them, so they're actually reconnecting them to the umbilicals of the seats that they're not using. You heard them refer to seats 2 and 1. If you were looking inside the Dragon capsule, it goes seats 1 through 4 from right to left, so it's a little backwards. Doug Hurley is in seat number 2, that's the commander's seat. Bob Behnken, seat 3, that's the pilot's seat for this flight. And obviously, nobody in seats 1 and 4 on this way uphill, but they are getting their suits connected to the umbilicals, which can provide communications when the astronauts are actually in the suit, but you can actually flow air into the suit through that umbilical, and they're just using that to dry it out now that the crew's not wearing them and they're comfortable on orbit.
Yeah, I can imagine that despite that airflow going through the suits throughout the entire time of leading up to launch and launch itself, I can imagine it's still, with the adrenaline and their hearts pumping, I imagine it might have gotten a little sweaty in there anyway.
Yeah, doing a little bit kind of like hanging your laundry in space almost, but they're going to be out of these suits for the next several hours. They'll be able to get a little bit more comfortable in the Dragon capsule. They will be wearing them again when it's time to dock, though. We typically have astronauts suit up anytime they're in a dynamic operation, so that's obviously a launch, anytime you're docking or undocking from a spacecraft, and then definitely on that re-entry and landing.
Yeah, so as you've heard us say before about these suits, they are custom made for Bob and Doug, so there's really no chance that they might be able to put the other ones on, like their name is stitched on it for obvious reasons, but these suits are highly intelligent and highly functional, so even though they naturally will be more comfortable out of the suit, they have said that the suits themselves are pretty nice to sit in, and as you can see from today's events and the launch attempt that we had before, they do spend quite a bit of time in those suits. So yeah, they are custom made for each individual astronaut, made here on site in Hawthorne, California, and same building that we build the rocket, and same building that we build the spacecraft. So pretty cool to see of that piece of hardware itself now in action, finally in Dragon.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about how the suit is almost like a mini spacecraft itself, and we always say that when we talk about when crew members go out for spacewalks, because that suit is kind of self-contained to have all of the breathing air, things like that, just in case they need it. Specifically for these flight suits on Dragon, they're going to be most needed if you have a depressurization, so just a loss of cabin pressure inside of Dragon. They're able to be in their suits. They can get pressurized nitrox or even pure oxygen if they are depressurized, and their suit will be at a lower pressure, because if you put the suit up all the way to 14 psi, it'd be kind of what we look at when you talk about wearing the large EMU, the great big white suit that we wear for spacewalks. Pressurizing that all the way up to atmospheric pressure would be you in a giant balloon where you probably wouldn't be able to move your arms very easily. So when you're in a suit and it's pressurized, you're typically at a much lower PSI. I'm not sure what the SpaceX suits are at, but our EMUs are at about 4, and then you have to up the oxygen content in what you're breathing just to make sure you're still getting enough. So they'll be able to flow pure oxygen into those suits if required.
Yeah, so just as a quick update, in case if you are just joining us, we have obviously lifted off. Bob and Doug are now on their way to the International Space Station, probably about an hour and a half into what will be a 19-hour journey in chasing down the space station. And we are approaching what is known as the Far Field Manual Flight Test. And this is basically the opportunity that they'll have to take back control of the Dragon capsule and just perform the ability to pilot it manually. Dragon is a fully autonomous spacecraft, meaning that it drives itself. It is highly intelligent. The flight computer makes all the calls using all the inputs from the sensors and the data that it receives. And so realistically, this is meant to be a fairly hands-off flight to the International Space Station. But in the event that for some reason Bob and Doug need to, or whichever astronaut is on board Crew Dragon might need to take manual control, the Far Field Manual Flight Test, which we have coming up in just a few minutes actually, is what we will be doing to basically complete the test objective for this mission, saying, yeah, that is absolutely possible to do.
Yeah, it's right there in the name. It's a demonstration mission 2, which on demonstration mission 1, we didn't have crew members, but did a lot of tests of Dragon's maneuverability, even testing an abort when we were on that final approach and docking. And so Bob and Doug are really just on board to really put it through the ringer, to put all the systems through and check them out that would require a crew being on board, because this will be that final test before NASA looks to certify SpaceX to begin those regular crewed flights to the space station. So we're talking about those 6-month to year-long missions with crew members living and working in space. And we're looking at doing that later this year, as soon as we're wrapped up with Demo 2, as soon as a month after Bob and Doug return. Be looking for that next crew to go up. 3 NASA astronauts and 1 from our partner agency, JAXA, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency. So things aren't slowing down. We're just at the very start of this mission. It's hard to think that we're already thinking forward to the next one this quickly, but that's just the nature of the business right now. Things
Absolutely.
Are definitely picking up in space.
Yeah, as SpaceX engineer myself, part of my job is to help NASA come in and certify the hardware that we're building. So I have been inside of the capsule that's now in space. I've been inside the capsule that, as Jessica Jensen mentioned earlier in the webcast, earlier this week was just in the Dragon Clean Room, which is down the hallway from us here, which is now in a different building for it to complete high pressure testing. But as someone that has spent the last 5 years working for this mission that we're executing today, it is so surreal to now be performing the parts of testing, of demonstrating with the astronauts. I still remember hearing the comms check on Wednesday of, just pre-flight, making sure that all different the key players in the mission were able to communicate back and forth, as well as to Bob and Doug. And I just got chills whenever I heard that tone of them communicating back and forth to mission control.
Yeah, well, it was great to see them get off the ground today, and hopefully we see them in just about 10 minutes or so doing this flight test. So we're going to continue to follow along. Again, we're here for the duration.
Dragon, SpaceX for timeline.
Hopefully we get a call on how quickly we get that test right here.
Manual flight demonstration here in about 10 minutes. As soon as that is complete, you have your go to step into your meal 3, and just to be aware that the boost burn is at 2142. So those 3 events are going to be pretty close in succession.
Thanks for the update. Yeah, we were looking at that. I think we're just about changed, so we'll give you a go to come back on board here in about maybe 5 minutes or so.
Copy that. We'll be standing by. And also, at your discretion, you can also de-stow the floater camera. And this is just prior to 2238.
All right, so there you heard it.
Copy that.
Should be joining Bob and Doug back inside the Dragon capsule in about 5 minutes or so. And then we should be seeing that manual flight test in a little less than 10 minutes from now. The International Space Station right now is flying. Let's get a quick look at the ground track. It's flying over the Pacific Ocean just to the southwest of Mexico, about to swing out over the central part of the United States. At the time of launch, though, North Carolina, and actually passed right over the Cape minutes before flight. And we were able to get a couple of images down from the current Expedition 63 commander, Chris Cassidy. This picture is of that pad, 39A, at the Kennedy Space Center, with Bob and Doug still on the launch pad, the rocket still there, taken 2 minutes before the launch.
That is
incredible.
incredible.
And he was able to send a couple of them down. So eagle eye for Chris Cassidy to snap these. We